Alice and I are always looking to be more healthy, and we were just talking about how fasting is one of the best ways to do that, but it's so hard. But the great thing about Prolon is that's not what you're doing. It's not that you're not eating for 5 days. Instead, you're using their science-backed program to convince your body you're fasting.
You guys, this 5-day program really is amazing. It comes beautifully packaged and it does all the thinking for you. Each day is its own box. And by following their program, I know I just feel so much better. And I can't wait to experience Prolon Next Gen and continue to see results. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolon is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off site-wide plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's PROLONLIFE.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/prosecutors.
Hello, this is a prepaid call from
Doris Moore,
an inmate at a Florida Department of Corrections institution.
My name is Jack Lawrence, and this is 1 Minute Remaining.
Hi, I'm David Jolly. I'm out of St. Lucie County, Florida.
my name is Amelia Carr.
My name's Helen Kidwell.
My name is Jessica Delancey.
Kimberly Boone.
A podcast released weekly where I'll talk to multiple inmates all serving lengthy prison sentences for some very serious crimes.
Pulls out an AK-47 and was going inside of the house.
It kind of caught me off guard there where you just casually said he pulls out an AK-47.
Right. He went to the trunk and pulled out an AK-47.
It's just an everyday occurrence. 1 minute remaining, wherever you get your podcasts from.
You have 1 minute remaining.
I'm Brett,
And I'm Alice.
and we are the Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, a local family falls victim to a crime so gruesome it's assumed to be a Halloween prank. Unfortunately, this is no prank, it's a Halloween massacre. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my spirited co-host, Alice.
Spirited like Casper. That is definitely the first
ghost.
word that pops to mind. Thanks, Brett. And, we are here today to talk about an incredibly tragic, sad story. This is just straight up murder. But yet, some of you out there listening, because you now think that we only do creepy, horror-like episodes at Halloween, hang tight, because this is just straight up murder. Three times over.
It is quite horrific, like most of the cases we cover throughout the year. It's one of those things. This one happened to happen on Halloween, so that's really the connection. But, yeah, I mean, the thing about this case, and we're going to talk about this a lot, this is one of those that feels like everyone involved was in denial so deep because the warning signs were all there until finally absolute horror occurs.
But, we'll circle back to this at the end because we're keeping you all in suspense as to what we're going to be talking about today. But I will say, as a parent, I really don't know what other steps I would have taken and if there would have been a different outcome if this were my life. And that's the really scary part, because I know a lot of people who are in similar situations, and you'll hear about this is a long lead up to what ultimately happens. But it's not very obvious to me that anyone else in the same shoes would have acted differently. And that's why I think this is particularly horrific.
Well, let's go ahead and dive into this case. For those of you who are not familiar with it, this case takes us to Ottawa County. And on the outskirts of that county lay the small town of Martin, Ohio, with a population of just over 1,000 residents. It's a community that is straight out of a Dateline episode, right? Close-knit, and violent crime is virtually non-existent. The kind of place where everybody knows their neighbors, and nothing bad ever happens. Which whenever someone says that, you know, the next thing they're going to say is the really horrible, terrible, awful thing that happened in this place. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Martin residents Bill and Susan Liske were well known in the community. The pair had met later in life and had formed a strong connection. They shared a common love of all things outdoors, particularly hunting, fishing, and gardening. And in 2001, the couple married, and they blended their family together. Bill had one son from a previous relationship, William B.J. Liske, and Susan had two sons, Derek and Devin Griffin.
And though Bill and Susan were very happy together, life in the Liske household was far from perfect. B.J. Liske was not happy with his new living situation. He had been used to living with his dad and had free reign over the house because his dad worked really long hours. And when Bill and Susan first got married, he was a teenager. He was about 15, 16 years old. And so he'd kind of had this very long reign to do whatever he wanted when he lived with his dad, but not so much when Susan and her two sons, who were around the same age as BJ, moved in. Susan, as probably a lot of mothers, began to establish some rules within the home and creating a more structured living environment. Really, these were probably the same rules that she had for her own sons when she was living with them. Things like, curfews and getting your work done, if you had chores, that sort of thing. Nothing out of the ordinary per se, but it was more structured than what BJ was used to. Now, this adjustment proved to be too much for BJ, and thus began a long history of tension between him and Susan, oftentimes ending in violence. And this all came to a head in 2004, about 3 years after Bill and Susan got married, when after a series of violent attacks, BJ was finally forced to leave the Liske home and move into a group home in nearby Sandusky.
As many of you listening know, when you try and blend a family together and different ways of living and different rules and everything else, there's going to be some growing pains. And you see that a lot. But this obviously is an extreme example of that, because you go from, I don't like your rules. I mean, this is not Mom, I hate you, and running up and slamming the door. This becomes very violent very quickly. We're gonna talk about that more, to the point that BJ's actually moving out of the home and the police are becoming involved, and there's all sorts of stuff going on. And as you're gonna see soon, there's more to this than just two families that aren't meshing as well as the parents would like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, up until the violence point, I think this sounds like a lot of blended families. There are entire sitcoms written about the tensions that come with blended families. But I think what's different about this particular situation is how violent BJ gets with Susan, his stepmom. Now, throughout the years, BJ's mental health continued to deteriorate. He was socially awkward, but his problems were deeper than just that. It wasn't just social awkwardness. He was actually diagnosed as suffering from schizoaffective disorder. And when BJ would drink, which he did not infrequently, his condition would worsen, and alcohol had the effect on him of making him very combative and often violent.
And anybody who's had to deal with a family member who has this condition knows how volatile they can be, particularly when they aren't taking their medication or when the medication isn't working. And alcohol seems like it is, the ultimate sort of accelerant to what's going on here. And unfortunately, you would think maybe it's as simple as he just can't drink anymore. But look, he's basically a grown person at this point. And so he shouldn't be doing this, but he is. And when he drinks, that combined with his mental illness that he's dealing with, leads him to enter into these violent episodes. And like, as I said, we're going to give you examples of the kind of things that would happen in this family. And a lot of them are pretty shocking. And as Alice said, you read this story, you look at this story from the outside, and you're seeing this develop, and you know how it's going to end. We wouldn't be covering this on a true crime podcast in October if everything turned out sunshine and rainbows. It's not going to happen that way. And so it's easy to sort of think, well, I would not have let that continue. I would have stopped it there. I would have stepped in. But so many people who are listening to this right now, you've lived this, and you know how difficult it can be when you have a family member who's struggling with this. And BJ was struggling, but his brothers, or his stepbrothers, I should say, I mean, they were thriving. Derek Griffin was an accomplished runner. He was setting records in high school for the relay. He also had a second-degree black belt in Taekwondo and represented the U.S. in a Taekwondo competition in Italy, and he was described as nice and quiet. I'm sure he lit up every room he walked into. Devin, who was the youngest of three boys, he was loved by the community. He was an active member of the church. He sang in the choir, and was also a diver for the Oak Harbor Rockets. So on the one hand, you got BJ, who's having all these issues, and on the other hand, his stepbrothers seem to be doing really well. And you can imagine that probably didn't help the situation. BJ probably looked at that and thought, this is unfair. They're treating them better than me. The reason everything's going well for them is because they like them better. You can imagine the dynamic that's beginning to form in this family. And unfortunately, life would be forever altered for this small town and for the Liske family on Halloween 2010, when 3 members of the beloved bunch would be brutally murdered in their own home.
Whew, so that's heavy. And, adding to this entire dynamic, remember these 3 sons from this blended family, they're all boys, they're all men, young men, who are teens when their family is being blended, all very close in age. And that's going to have a different dynamic than if you had, very differing ages or different stages of life. But here we have essentially very similarly situated boys with very different outcomes in the home that they share. So let's dive into the timeline here, because we've talked about how this is a long lead up to what ultimately happened on Halloween 2010. So in 2001, Susan and Bill get married, and Susan, with her 2 sons, move into the Liske home. This would mark the start of a long history of issues between BJ and Susan. Neighbors who were close to the Liskes noted that there were several incidents between BJ and Susan. One neighbor, Mark, was called over on multiple occasions to try and calm BJ down, because though BJ is a child, he's still living at home, he's a teenager. He's essentially like a grown man, and Susan is a woman, and he kind of gets so violent, so combative that she cannot physically control him. And so she has to enlist the help of their neighbor to come and calm the situation down, because she is not able to do so herself. Now, many people will say this, and you can tell as we're telling you what BJ does, that he is showing signs of mental illness, and that drinking that he does, it typically aggravates his already unpredictable behavior, making him even more violent and unpredictable. In 2002, Bill calls the police when BJ was threatening to hurt himself. So now it's a different dynamic. A lot of that tension had been between BJ and Susan, but now it's BJ's dad who calls the police, because BJ's not only threatening others in the home, he's now threatening to hurt himself. And when the police arrive, BJ actually attacks the police, and he ends up catching an assault charge in juvenile court, but that charge went nowhere. So this really, you begin to see the escalation. Not only are the parents not able to kind of control BJ, they've started to ask neighbors to come help, right? It's bringing other people into the home dynamic. And that's not even enough to control BJ. Now the police are being involved in helping to control BJ. And even when the police come, his response to them is violence.
And, he's being violent. He's being violent with the family. He's being violent with the police. And yet there's still nothing happening on the sort of official side. There are no consequences for this behavior. And to the extent that the behavior shouldn't have consequences because it's driven primarily by mental illness, there's nothing really being done about that either. And that's one of the things about this case. And we're doing this case in Halloween because it culminates in Halloween. But this is one that I feel like is emblematic of problems throughout sort of our justice system, our mental health system, to the extent we even have one, where you have people and families who are in this situation and they love a family member, but the family member is violent. And the family member is violent because of these mental issues. I mean, they are not rational and they are acting irrationally, but unfortunately that often presents itself as violence. And what do you do about that? On the one hand, the family doesn't want the police to come. They don't want to see their family member in jail or in prison. They want to see them get help. But sometimes the only way you can even do that is if you start them in the criminal justice system. But once they're in the criminal justice system, who knows how that's going to go? And when they get in the criminal justice system and nothing happens, that only emboldens the behavior even more because it feels like there are no consequences for whatever is going on.
And, we actually see that dynamic a good bit, unsurprisingly, when family members or loved ones involve law enforcement because there's violence, there's no other option for them other than to call the law enforcement. What happens we see is that once charges are pressed, they love their family member. They don't want them to get into the criminal justice system, so they drop charges. And we see that repeatedly, especially, unfortunately, with battered women, like women who are abused by their significant others. We see this on records where it will be like, arrest, charges dropped, arrest, charges dropped, but you clearly see a pattern of violence. And, it's a really difficult situation when it's your loved one. You may not want to put them into the criminal justice system, but like Brett said, when you keep getting arrested and then there are no consequences, in fact, your loved ones are just going to back down from those charges, or you may threaten them to back down from those charges and they ultimately do. There's no recourse, and it almost heightens the situation where it's like, well, I know nothing's going to happen to me because Dad loves me too much to really go through with it. And we've talked about this before. The prosecution can always move forward with charges, even if the victim doesn't want to press charges. But it's really hard to do so, right? Optically, it's really difficult in front of a jury. You are usually overburdened with cases to prosecute. And if you have the victim who's like, you know what, this is a family matter, we're going to go to counseling, we will figure this out. You don't want to necessarily drag that family through something that could be very painful, very difficult for the victim who doesn't want to press charges. And you also have a bunch of cases that do have victims who need to be vindicated or who need justice. So you may turn your resources to those cases instead. So it's a difficult dynamic.
And Alice makes such good points. And it's one of those situations where you have this push to change a dynamic without putting any resources behind it. So for a very long time, police and prosecutors took the position of no victim, no crime. So if there's no victim, there's no crime. We're not going to prosecute it, even if there was a crime. If the victim doesn't want to, quote unquote, press charges, if they don't want to go through with it, we're not going to either. Because as Alice said, there's just way too much on everybody's plate. And a case where the victim won't help you and won't testify is going to be a harder case. It's going to take more time, more resources, probably is going to go to trial. There's all sorts of reasons not to do it. We're trying to change that dynamic to focus on some of these cases because we know, and the statistics tell us this, that if you have, just to talk about domestic violence, and this is a little bit of an aside, but I think it makes sense to talk about it. We've talked about this some before. Domestic violence. If you have someone who strangles a person, so you have a man who chokes his girlfriend, wife, significant other, if they do that, the chances that that woman will be murdered by that person skyrocket. The chances that that person will kill a police officer skyrocket. When you hear about domestic violence cases that end in police officers responding and dying, if you look back in the history of that person, they probably have been accused of strangling someone before. The statistics are absurd. So one of the things that we're trying to do is when you see that, even if the person doesn't want to prosecute, if the police do a good job of documenting the initial incident, you can move forward and prosecute. And that's great. And you can prioritize those worst cases, but so many are going to fall through the cracks. And they're going to fall through the cracks because of everything Alice talked about, and just because, frankly, it is low-level crime, even when it's violent, even when it's assaults like this, often just results in a non-prosecution. It often gets charged. The person goes to jail. They get bailed out. And then at some point, the local DA does what they call no prosing it, where they just say, we're not going to actually prosecute this. And it goes away. And that happens so often. And I think that's what you're seeing happening here.
And, you know, I think it's worth mentioning here as well that the family members often try to go the law enforcement route because their hope isn't necessarily that the person has to serve a long sentence in jail. They're hoping it wakes them up, and then maybe through the justice system, they can get the mental health treatment. Because as you all know, if you have an adult on your hands, it's very difficult to force them to either take medication or get medical treatment, mental health treatment, medical treatment against their will. And if you are in a state where you are not being treated for mental illness, oftentimes you may not be in the state of mind to recognize you need the medication or the treatment. And so it becomes this downward spiral. And so this is kind of heightened by the fact that we have a medical system, which I'm all for freedom. I don't really want someone to be able to have medical decision making over my body. So it's a tension there as well. But I think it's that it's so difficult to get someone who is an adult mental health treatment if they don't want it, that we've somehow kind of turned to the criminal justice system when things get out of hand, when that may not be the best route to help treat someone who needs mental health treatment.
And since we've completely gone off the rails here and are just like, somebody wrote us a question and it was, what is the one thing you would change about the criminal justice system if you could? And my answer to that question would be to have fully funded mental health treatment up to and including asylums, this sort of asylum type thing, because we have no facilities anymore. You know, a lot of times what we see is we see people who come in, like we see cases where people will come in and they are obviously mentally ill, often to the point where they're incompetent to stand trial. They can't proceed. But the bar for finding them to be dangerous is really high, because if you find someone to be dangerous but mentally ill, then what you have to do is you have to put them somewhere. You have to put them in a medical facility, basically a prison that is a medical facility. And there aren't many beds for that. So the chances of actually getting anyone, even if they are dangerous and even if they are violent, actually getting them declared dangerous or violent is basically impossible. So you end up having these people who essentially have severe mental health issues. They are violent and dangerous, but they essentially have an automatic get out of jail free card until they actually murder someone or commit a violent crime that is so violent that it can't be ignored. There is nothing that anyone can do about them. And you can't get them treatment. You can't keep them away from the public if they're dangerous or untreatable. And it's amazing to me that this exists, that we don't, it's not that we don't prioritize it. We don't put any priority on it whatsoever. And that's the worst of the worst. That's not even to say sort of like a robust mental health treatment for people who have mental health issues, but not as serious.
We have literally no plan. It's not like, oh, we don't have enough resources to execute the plan. It's that the plan doesn't even exist. And part of it is it's the interplay between like the medical industry and the justice system. And it's a very difficult, a lot of constitutional issues and autonomous issues and HIPAA. There's so many things kind of at the interplay, and there aren't a lot of people who have experience, I think, in both. And so then you have medical experts who are having to be like therapists for law enforcement issues, and vice versa. You have law enforcement having to act like mental health professionals when neither are really adept to do it. So I agree with you. It's a huge hole in our justice system. And this is not really that big of a tangent for this case, because I do think this is a very worthy conversation to be had to see how the outcome could have been different here. Because what I started with was, I don't know currently in our society how this could have played out differently. It's not clear to me as we go through the timeline that I can point to, there's the errant decision. Because dad does call the police. This isn't just left between his new wife and his son, and he's out of it. No, he's stepping in. He is trying to help his son, help his wife, and it only escalates.
Yeah. So thank you, Julia, for that question. So we just answered your question in the middle of an episode, but I think Alice is right. I think it applies here, and you'll continue to see that. So we're at 2004 now, and things are not better. After an incident where BJ actually crashed his stepbrother's pickup truck while he was drinking, he was charged with underage drinking, domestic violence, unauthorized use of a motor vehicle, leaving the scene of a crime, and failure to control. He'd actually fled the scene. He gets back home. He's confronted by Susan, and he gets into a fight with her and strikes her in the chest. The police eventually show up. They charge him with all these things, but she doesn't want this to stick. She doesn't want to press charges against him. She doesn't want to testify against him. She's trying her best, as Alice said, to deal with this and to keep it out of the criminal justice system, but it's not very long at all before BJ is in trouble again. Later that same year, he is charged with felonious assault and robbery after he actually hits Susan in the head with a coffee mug and steals her car keys. But these charges are later dropped when BJ, as we just foreshadowed, was found not competent to stand trial. And if you are not competent to stand trial and you're not dangerous enough to hold, the only thing left to do is to dismiss the charges. There is nothing else you can do. You can't try them. You can't hold them. We talked about this when we talked about the Hoggle children and how in that case you have a situation where Catherine Hoggle disappeared her children, will not tell us where they are, but can't be tried for it because she's been found to be incompetent. Now, she is in custody because of a dangerousness evaluation, but once again, she killed 2 children. Ordinarily, it takes a lot. This is a good example. Smashing a coffee cup into your stepmother's head and stealing her vehicle is not enough to get you committed anywhere as a dangerous individual. So the case just goes away.
And, you know, I think it's important to note here, too, he's 18 years old. So he's still a child, but, you know, technically an adult. And he is a larger person, right? He's not some small child. He's not a 10-year-old, an 11-year-old, 12-year-old. He's a full-grown man who is smashing Susan in the head with a coffee mug. Punching in the chest. You can punch someone very, very seriously in the chest, obviously hard enough to stop their heart, as we've seen, unfortunately, on the football field before. But then we're escalating to head injuries. I mean, these are strikes not meant to scare. They are meant to do intense damage.
But it continues. And in fact, BJ will eventually attack Susan while she's in the shower. And at this point, the family has had enough. They take action. They kick BJ out of the house, and he is moved into a group home in Sandusky. But it's one of those places where he's in the group home, but he can kind of come and go. And the Liske family, they're still trying to make a place for him. So even though he's done all these things, he is allowed to come home and stay with the Liskes on the weekends. But even during this time, when he's in Sandusky and he is coming home, he has 3 more violent encounters with the police.
So now fast forward 2 years, it's 2006, and BJ is 20 years old. So we kind of talked about this before. Now that he's a legal adult, it's difficult to force him to accept any medical treatment. But his dad, Bill, steps in and does all the right steps legally to try and help his son. And he ultimately is appointed as BJ's guardian. And the goal of this was to get his son to take his medication because as many people who are like BJ exhibiting kind of violent expressions of his mental illness, when he's medicated, he's actually just fine. He's not violent. He can operate, but he did succumb to the same temptation as we see in so many cases of people with severe mental illness. He'd take the medication and feel better, be in control of his emotions. He's not violent. And no one really likes to be dependent on medication. It might have side effects. You have to remember to do it. You know, there could be stigma around it, whatever it is. But the person gets lulled into a sense of security and thinks, I'm all better. I needed the medication to get me better, but now I'm all better and I don't need medication anymore. And so they stop taking it. And that's what BJ did. And what happens when you stop taking it? It's not as simple as an on and off switch where the next day you can just go back on the medication. As those of you who may have medical training, you know that it's a delicate balance with hormones in your body. And when you go off these medications, it's unpredictable how your body reacts. It's not necessarily that you just fall back to the degree of mental illness that you were previously suffering from. Oftentimes what we see is that you fall even deeper into a mental state than you were before because of the interplay of hormones and drugs that were there and then are taken away, and the body compensating and reacting in ways that is not necessarily predictable from patient to patient. So even though Bill was appointed guardian, he was able to get his son to take medication at times. There was this kind of terrible cycle that BJ would go through. He'd take medication, feel better, stop taking medication, become violent all over again. And it's, like we said, it's not as simple as just going back on the medication, and things do escalate. In the summer of 2010, something happens that you can imagine just objectively could cause friction in any family. Derek Griffin, one of Susan's sons, had gotten in trouble with the law. He had a drunken disorderly charge. And when BJ found this out, he became extremely upset because even though Derek got in trouble with the law for something to do with drinking and disorderly conduct, something that sounds similar to some of the charges that BJ has caught in the past, the Liskes did not force Derek to leave the home like BJ was forced to do. And you can imagine that this caused a lot of animosity between BJ and the rest of the Liske household, and was one of the only times that BJ showed anger towards his father. Most of the anger had been directed towards Susan, but now he is mad at his dad as well.
Yeah, and this seems to be a real triggering event for him, and something that I think from that point forward he dwells on. And this brings us all the way to October 30th, 2010. So on this day, the day before Halloween, he and his father had actually been out on a hunting trip. They have a cabin in Carroll County, and they'd gone out hunting, and they had killed a deer, and they were in a celebratory mood. And they decided to have a get-together in the barn at their home with their neighbor, Mark. So this is kind of a very small party, celebrating the deer, going into Halloween. And they're hanging out and they're drinking. And this included BJ, which he was known to be agitated whenever he would drink, and he was already in a delicate mental state. But nevertheless, and we talked about this, you see this so often where people let their guard down. We've talked about this in some of the other mental health cases before, where everything seems fine, people start to let their guard down, and that's when something bad happens. And essentially that's what you have happening here. Everybody's drinking, they're having a good time. Ordinarily, BJ would go back to the group home on a day like this, but he'd been drinking and everybody was happy, and so the decision was made, he is going to stay at the Liske home. So they make him his little bed, which he would always have on the couch whenever he stayed over. And the plan was he's going to stay the night. Everything's fine. This is a Saturday night, next day Sunday, and that's what they're going to do. At 6:30 a.m. the next morning, October 31st, 2010, a neighbor hears a loud bang, which they will later say sounded to them like a gunshot. Didn't really make sense to them, so they assumed it was something else and just sort of moved on with their lives.
At 10 a.m., Devin, the younger son of Susan, came home. So he wasn't at the party because he had stayed the night before at his dad's house, and he was stopping by the Liske family home before church on a Sunday to get a change of clothes because he actually had a performance with the choir that day at church. And when he arrived at the Liske home, he saw BJ loading up his dad's F-150. He noted that BJ, who is typically socially awkward, was more talkative than usual. He was not particularly chummy with his stepbrother Devin, but on this particular day, he was loading up his dad's truck and was very social with Devin, which Devin just noted to be out of the ordinary. But Devin didn't think much of it. He was just dropping by. He had to be somewhere. He had to be at church. And so he got his clothes and left, and he didn't see anyone else at the home, thinking nothing of it. At 11 a.m., Devin is finished with church, and he comes back to the Liske home. Prior to that time, For the last hour, he'd been at church. He was performing in a choir concert. And when he gets home, like a lot of teenage boys, he actually goes straight up to his bedroom to play video games. Devin didn't see any other members of the Liske household, but again, he didn't really think anything of it. I think a lot of teenage boys probably would go play video games and not register that there was no one else around.
So at around 1:30, he's still playing video games. He's just up in his room playing video games. And at this point, he gets a call from his aunt, Lori Morse. And Lori is concerned because Derek, his brother, was supposed to come over and work with her husband that morning, but he didn't show up. She'd been trying to get in touch with Susan and Derek all morning, but had been unable to reach them. So at this point, for the first time, Devin realizes, I haven't seen anybody all day. It's already 1:30 in the afternoon, and I haven't seen anybody. So he starts going around his house looking for his family members, and the first place he goes is he goes to Bill and Susan's room. He goes to his mom and dad's room to check on them. When he walks in, he's shocked to find that they're both still in bed. And in fact, they have the covers pulled up over their head, which is very unusual anyway, and particularly unusual for them, who they were always early risers. So the fact that they're still in bed at 1:30 seems kind of strange. He shakes his mother. Her foot's actually sticking out of the covers, but she doesn't stir.
This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/Wondery.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Bombas makes the most comfortable socks, underwear, and T-shirts.
Warning, Bombas are so absurdly comfortable you may throw out all your other clothes.
Sorry, do we legally have to say that?
No, this is just how I talk, and I really love my Bombas.
They do feel that good. And they do good, too. One item purchased equals one item donated.
To feel good and do good, go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
Craving your next action-packed adventure? Audible delivers thrills of every kind on your command, like Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, where a lone astronaut must save humanity from extinction, narrated with stunning intensity by Ray Porter. From electrifying suspense and daring quests to spine-tingling horror and romance in far-off realms, unleash your adventurous side with gripping titles that'll keep you guessing. Discover exclusive Audible originals, hotly anticipated new releases, and must-listen bestsellers that hook you from the first minute. Because Audible knows there's no greater thrill than the one that speaks to you. Discover what lies beyond the edge of your seat. Start your free 30-day trial at audible.com/WonderyUS. That's audible.com/WonderyUS.
At this point, he pulls back the covers to reveal what initially his shocked mind interpreted as this must be some sort of Halloween prank. I must be, I don't know, totally rational, right? But nevertheless, when he sees what he sees when he pulls back those covers, he thinks, Halloween prank, that's the only explanation for this. In fact, Bill and Susan had both been shot in the head multiple times, and it doesn't take long for him to realize this is not a prank. This is something horrible that has happened. He calls his aunt Lori back in hysterics.
Whew, that is a really difficult scene to walk into. So at 1:57 p.m., after receiving Devin's call, Lori calls 911. I mean, Devin is in such hysterics that he can't even, get his wits about him to call 911. So she calls 911 at 1:57 p.m. and she immediately jumps in her car and drives straight to the Liske household. She entered the bedroom and was met with the same scene that Devin had described on the phone. This, unfortunately, was not a prank at all. Bill and Susan Liske were dead. Police arrived at the scene shortly after, and upon entering the home, they noted that nothing initially appeared to be out of place. There didn't seem to be some sort of a robbery or a burglary. Nothing was out of place, which would make sense that Devin didn't notice anything when he came home. It's not like the door was kicked in or that bookshelves were pulled over or glass was smashed all over the house. It looked like their normal family home. Now, the investigators entered Bill and Susan's first floor bedroom, and they, too, saw that the bodies of Bill and Susan were in bed with several gunshot wounds to the head. Bill, who was located closest to the door, was believed to have been killed first, with the shooter likely shooting him from the doorway because of the way he's shot. He was shot 5 times, and he did not have any defensive wounds since he was likely asleep at the time of the killing.
Susan was discovered in bed with her legs hanging over the side. She had been shot 3 times and had a defensive wound to her hand, having likely woken when her husband was killed first. It would later be discovered that Susan had also been raped. The police speculated that this had happened after she was already dead. Impossible to know for certain, but given the progression of these murders, it seems like she had been shot pretty quickly after her husband had been shot as well. So as brutal and awful a murder as you can imagine. Both were shot with a .22 caliber rifle. No shell casings were discovered at the crime scene, so investigators deduced that the killer must have taken them. This is one of those things also that in the future, when you start thinking about insanity defenses, the fact that you took the shells with you is the kind of thing that a prosecutor would point to as you were thinking about the crime and thinking about getting away with it.
And it kind of, goes against insanity defenses when you have your wits about you enough to know that there will be police officers looking for the effects of your actions. Because the insanity defense is that you are not in your right state of mind to understand the consequences of your actions and that you do not understand that you are committing a crime. Right. And so removing the shell casings is a way to show, without knowing, obviously, what someone's thinking, but someone's state of mind.
And the other thing that will be significant there is the order of death. You've already seen this in this instance. If you're someone who is not in your right mind and you're murdering people, you might not think to eliminate the strongest person first. But he does that. He kills his father first because his father is the person who's most likely going to be able to stop him. But that's not the only thing he did, because the police weren't finished. They continued up the stairs where they found a locked bedroom. They forced the door open and were met with yet another gruesome scene. The body of 23-year-old Derek Griffin was found in bed, but he had not been shot. Instead, he had large blunt force trauma to his head. His head and his skull had been cracked open with what investigators thought to be a hammer or hammer-like weapon. He had no defensive wounds and was likely asleep at the time of the murder. Investigators determined that Derek was likely killed first. And they believed that the gun wasn't used because the killer was trying to avoid waking Bill and Susan, which yet again is another thing that shows that kind of intentionality and thoughtfulness that's going to preclude some sort of insanity defense later on.
And initially, investigators looked at Devin Griffin as a potential suspect. You can understand why they would look to him. He was the one to discover the bodies, and he's the only one of the 4 family members who live in this household on a day-to-day basis who was left not murdered. And of course, there is the now, after the fact, devastating, what we now know to be devastating, was that he was in the home with 3 dead bodies for hours before they were discovered and before the police were notified. So he was in there, essentially in the crime scene, alone with them for a very, very long time. But Devin is quickly ruled out as a suspect. He had an alibi, and, you never know how people are going to react, but he was visibly shaken and absolutely just unconsolable about these murders. And he was acting in a way that the police found to be believable. But I think more importantly was he was not there. He was with his dad's, and then he came home for just mere minutes before going to the church. And they could tell that the bodies had been dead for quite some time by the time they found them. Police also found a muddy footprint near a dock on the pond of the property. So they thought, well, we know that there were weapons used in this triple murder. So had the killer dumped maybe the guns in the pond? So they drained the pond, but they found nothing. And while locals were whispering about cult murders on Halloween, because remember, this is Halloween Sunday, the police actually had a much more concrete idea of who was responsible. Devin told investigators that he had run into BJ earlier that morning at the Liske home, but both him and Bill's white F-150 were gone by the time he returned from church. So investigators immediately turned their attention to BJ, and their top priority became locating BJ Liske. First, they checked his mom's home and the surrounding area, but unsurprisingly, BJ was nowhere to be seen. Having no luck there, they quickly moved, because here you have a very dangerous person who has a very violent past, suspected of brutally murdering 3 people in their sleep. And so local law enforcement reached out to officers in Carroll County, where the Liske's hunting cabin was located. Remember, they had gone hunting the day before and were celebrating after a very fun afternoon day of hunting. And they issued a bolo, be on the lookout, and asked Carroll County to check the hunting cabin for any sign of BJ or the Ford F-150.
So at 5:09 that evening, a Carroll County deputy pulls up to the hunting cabin and spots the white F-150 outside. BJ actually walks outside, sees the officer, and is arrested without incident. Doesn't resist, and unlike so many other encounters with law enforcement, isn't violent at all. But the officer notices there are some things wrong. Number one, BJ has brown and red stains on his shoes and on his socks that appear to the officer to be blood. Law enforcement would later confirm that BJ had Bill, Susan, and Derek's DNA on his clothing. Investigators descend on the cabin, and they search it and the surrounding property. They find blood on the outside and inside of the truck, and they find a .22 caliber rifle in the cab, which was owned by Bill Liske and would be found to be consistent with the gunshot wounds on Bill and Susan. Investigators also searched the Liske home in Martin. In the living room closet, they found a safe that appeared out of place. They removed the safe and found a bloody hammer behind it, the murder weapon in Derek's death.
So, in other words, they are able to locate BJ relatively quickly. And on November 10th, 2010, just about a week and a half after the murders, this is incredibly swift justice so far, BJ Liske is arraigned. He was charged with 6 counts of aggravated murder, all of which had death penalty specifications, and Liske pleaded not guilty to all counts. During the arraignment, attorney Gary Coley was appointed as Liske's guardian. Remember, previously, BJ's father had been his court-appointed guardian, but obviously his father was no longer around, so he needed a new guardian. And the court also appointed 2 defense attorneys to represent Liske. His bail was set at $3 million. It was $1 million for each of the murders. And some time after this, the timing's not clear, BJ actually confesses to his mother on a recorded prison line. His mom says, "BJ, how could you?" To which he responds, "I wasn't in my right mind."
And I mean, at this point, what more do you need? You've got the guns, you've got the clothes, you've got the hammer, and now you essentially have him confessing to his mother. Now, one thing that has to be determined is he competent? Remember, he'd been found not competent to stand trial before. This time, however, in March of 2011, he is declared competent to stand trial. And the cynical ones of you out there would probably say, much more likely to find him competent to stand trial when it's a triple murder than when it's an assault. And in this case, he is found competent to stand trial. And you kind of wonder if that was really the deciding event. Once he was competent to stand trial, you knew what was going to happen. And as a matter of fact, on August 12th, 2011, in a hearing that was initially intended to be a pretrial hearing, BJ agrees to a plea deal. He withdraws his not guilty plea and pleads guilty to 3 counts of aggravated murder. In the plea agreement, prosecutors agree to drop 3 of the original 6 counts, which just goes to one of the things we talk about sometimes. In a lot of state court actions, 3 people are murdered. There are 6 counts of murder. I never really understand exactly how that works. I think it has something to do with the way you charge lesser included offenses in certain states, but in any event, they drop 3 of the counts, and most importantly, they take the death penalty off the table. And in exchange, Liske agrees that he will take 3 life without parole sentences.
On September 15th, 2011, less than a year after the murders, Liske is sentenced to 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. And during the sentencing, he read a 2-page apology he had written, citing his mental health and the devil as the reason behind the killings. And 2 family members, Lori Morse and Lisa Curl, were able to share victim impact statements. I mean, all around, this is a very sad situation. The fact that and we have a lot of sentencings with people who plead guilty where they don't say anything. There's no apology. They don't make any statement to the court because you don't have to say anything to the court. Typically, the judge will turn to the defendant before sentencing and say, is there anything you'd like to say? And it is up to you if you want to speak or not. I would say I see people speak a good bit, and if they apologize, it's usually a pretty generic sorry, like I'm sorry that everyone has to be here on my account. Very rarely do you see like a very heartfelt apology to the victims, and this just goes to the fact that he is struggling with so much mental illness that there's no winning here, right? Even though there's justice for, Derek, Bill, and Susan in terms of their murderer being put to jail, but this was their family member, and he was and is, clearly struggling with a lot of mental illness. And you have other family members who are just absolutely broken because their family members are now dead. I mean, this is all around just an incredibly sad situation. And on March 31st, things don't get any less sad in this case. About 4 years later, March 31st, 2015, BJ Liske is in prison serving one of his 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole when he is found dead in his prison cell at Ross Correctional Institution. And he was dead from a self-inflicted wound. And he was only 29 years old at the time of his death.
Yeah, just a life marked by tragedy and violence, and ended violently at such a young age. And I mean, there's nothing really good that can be said about this story. This is a horrible, horrific crime that ends with a suicide by someone who was very clearly struggling with some severe mental illness. I'm not excusing what he did. I don't think he was insane, but this is that place in the criminal justice system. We talk about this sometimes where the system falls apart. We talk about how the system falls apart sometimes. We talked about this on Legal Briefs when we talked about very young juveniles who commit horrible crimes. When a 10-year-old murders his mother, or a 12-year-old rapes and murders his cousin. And what do you do about that? And the knee-jerk reactions that some people have, where it's like, well, he's only 10. Yeah, but he's clearly very violent. He's only 12, but he's clearly very violent and dangerous. And the system is just not made to deal with that. It just breaks down when you have those extremes. And here you have a similar situation. Extremely violent, awful, horrible crime. The kind of crime that ordinarily, you would say the death penalty is too good for this person. But then the background and the issues. And it's like, what do you do about that? Because on the one hand, you feel like the culpability is lesser, but you don't think this person should ever get out. And as we said, we don't really have anywhere else to put this person except for prison. And so that's where they go. And it sounds like BJ's mental health treatment never improved. And at this point, this was almost the inevitable end. The inevitable end of his life was going to be in violence. And unfortunately, the tragedies that struck this family, it was like cascading things. The day after the murder, so go back to November 1st, 2010, Bill's sister, Susan, died in a fire when there was an explosion in her garage. And you can imagine when people first heard this, they thought, what in the world is going on? What did BJ do? But it was later determined that this was completely accidental. It was caused by a cigarette that wasn't put out correctly, and it was unrelated to the murders, though you can imagine the speculation. But actually, people would say that of all the people in BJ's life, his Aunt Susan was actually the person he was closest to. But nevertheless, just another tragedy for this family.
And there is some maybe redemption in this story, some small amount of redemption. Devin, remember Susan's son who had found all of their murdered bodies, later would actually get married at the farm where his family was killed. He said that he didn't want to remember this place, his family home, as just this tragic event. He wanted to turn it into something, a silver lining, where he would start the next chapter of his life with his new family. And later he had a son with his wife, and he named him Derek after his late brother. And Devin really had his entire family just taken from him, and being the one to actually find his family members in their state, I can't even begin to imagine. But he has been able to be a much bigger person in this story than I think I could have ever been, because others have asked him before about BJ, probably wanting him to unleash everything that BJ took from him. But instead, he said of BJ, quote, "He wasn't a monster. We were trying to help him, but we may not have had the opportunity to help him the way he needed to be helped," which is such a beautiful and generous view of a very difficult situation where mental health took root in a really, really tragic way here. But I think that was a very incredible statement that he could make about losing his entire family because of BJ's demons in his head.
And look, I mean, I think it's remarkable that he can be that clear-eyed about it, because if you just think about what he went through, what he experienced and what he saw, the fact that he can take that position now is remarkable. But he's right. He's right. And in so many of these cases, we've talked about the postpartum depression cases. We talked about the mother in Massachusetts who was in the grips of postpartum psychosis and murdered her 3 children. And there's been so much debate about what to do about that. She's been charged with 3 counts of capital murder. That seems right when you strangle your children to death. But on the other hand, there was something going on in her mind when that happened. This wasn't just she didn't want to have kids anymore, And I don't have the answers for that, and I don't know how you deal with that. But the thing that's sort of amazing to me is these things happen, and we never talk about it. Like, these are not debates we have in society. Like, you don't, when presidential candidates are debating each other, they don't talk about this. When your senators, your governors, or whoever, when they're talking about this never comes up. You have this very serious situation which affects so many people, and we just never talk about it. We don't grapple with this issue. We don't struggle with how to balance these things or what to do in these situations or what our policy should be. We just, if things like this happen and we say, wow, isn't that terrible? Isn't that awful? And we just sort of continue on. And like I said, I don't have any answers for that, but we like to think that true crime is more than just entertainment. We like to tell ourselves that. This is the kind of case that should make you think and make you wonder, what steps can we take to address these issues in the future?
Yeah, I mean, that was a question that I started this entire episode with, which is that you've now heard the whole story, the whole timeline. What could have been done differently to effectuate a different outcome? I don't think I have an answer right now, except that unfortunately this kind of trajectory is not a one-off. This is not some, Halloween cultish murder. Everything about this, honestly, is so commonplace and something that we see probably in a lot of different people in our lives. We certainly see it in the criminal justice system. And because of that, we know that this is capable of being repeated. And I hope that, we have those conversations and avoid a situation where there's another Liske family massacre, because this is so incredibly devastating. And if nothing else, to have this conversation and begin to see, what can we do about this? No one's irredeemable. And the fact that BJ's life ended in prison from a self-inflicted wound, is just like a devastating cherry on top of a devastating Sunday.
Yeah, this one's rough, guys. Glad you stuck it out with us. I feel like we've had a lot of episodes lately, frankly, that have been a little tougher than maybe some of the others. And we try and make these Halloween episodes a little bit more fun, but this one, definitely not it. We've actually had, I don't know that any of our Halloween episodes so far have been fun. They've been very dark, actually. They've actually been very dark, and they've dealt with sort of societal issues. It's kind of crazy. But anyway, I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on this. I'm sure a lot of y'all have stories, personal stories, things that you've dealt with, things that you struggled. I think a lot of you listened to this story and you heard your own stories in it. You've experienced something similar. You've had family members who've struggled with this, who've been violent, and you don't know what to do. And if you want to share those stories with us, just know we're always open to hearing, to listening, and, to providing whatever comforting words we can. A lot of times I think just knowing there's somebody out there to talk to helps people, and knowing that you're not alone, and you're not. If you're struggling with this, if this is going on in your life, you are not alone, and it's happened before. And there are some resources out there that are available, not as many as there should be. But like I said, just know you're not alone. Let us know what you think. prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media. Well, Alice, do you want to answer some questions? Maybe some happier questions?
Yeah, maybe let's take a lighter take.
Yeah. So I want one person, Sally Sue, sent us, her question was, why does my mother hate me? So we're not going to answer that one. That one's too dark. I assume that was a joke, Sally Sue. But I'm sure your mother loves you very much.
And if your mother doesn't love you, we love you.
We love you. Exactly. We're your mom now. Okay, so this is a good one. This is from SkinsFan36. It says, in 2021, my gem of a husband reached out to the pod to share how you both inspired me to pursue law. He sent me the nicest email, and I can happily share I am 3 weeks into my 1L and loving every second of it. My question for you both, if my goal is to work in criminal law, to be decided if it's prosecution or defense work, what must I do, whether that be a class, experience, job, etc., while in law school?
I would say if you want to work in this field, then go get an internship either on the defense or prosecution side, or just go sit in the courtroom and see what the day in and day out is, because it's a slog. It's a very demanding profession, and it's also pretty dark. You see a lot of the worst of everything we've discussed today about the mental health system, about the justice system, about domestic violence, and all of these things on a daily basis. And it is incredibly rewarding work, whether you're on the prosecution or defense side, but it is certainly a decision you need to go into with wide open eyes. And the best way to do that is courts are open. And so there's probably a court near you. State, federal, whatever, and look up the docket. They're public. They're usually posted on their website, and you can go sit in on different hearings and just see what defense attorneys and prosecutors are doing in that district, and grab a cup of coffee with one of them. Ask them about their life trajectory. People, they're humans too. And I've grabbed coffee with a bunch of people who've just come up to me at the courthouses, or law students who come up after I give a talk or something, because they just want to hear, how did you end up in this position? So see it for yourself, the real stuff, not just the sexy stuff that you see on TV, and see if this is the type of day in and day out profession that you really want to pursue.
Yeah, Alice is 100% right. Do both. There will come a time where you're going to have to pick a side. You can switch a little bit, but generally speaking, you kind of have to pick a side. But you're not there yet. So go intern with a prosecutor's office. Go intern with a defense firm. I mean, here's the thing. If you are able to work for free, you will be able to find a job, because people need help and they don't always have resources. Not saying you should lead with your work for free, but sometimes it's hard to find these paid things when you're not yet a lawyer. So if you're open to that and it's something you can do, that's always good. Check with your school. There are not going to be any classes you can take where you get to be a prosecutor, but there are often clinics where you get to be a defense attorney and where you can work with, in a lot of states, you can get what's called a practice card, which basically, when you're a 3L or so, you can go to court, you can represent people as long as you're working with a licensed attorney. See if that's available to you. Do that, work in both. They're very different. They're very different from what you would expect. Being a defense attorney is hard in a lot of ways. Client management, I've never done it. I've done it for a law firm, but that doesn't count. Client management is really hard, and it's the thing that drives defense attorneys crazy, is having to deal with their clients who don't understand the law, who have a bunch of jailhouse lawyers who are telling them all this stuff. So just see that firsthand, because it may not be what you want to do. You really have to be a true believer to be like a public defender, for instance. You got to love it, because some of the stuff you have to go through is not great. So absolutely, do them both. Get that firsthand experience however you can. And it doesn't actually matter which side you're getting it with. As long as you're getting it, it'll be valuable. One day when you're applying to prosecutors' offices, U.S. attorney positions, or you want to work as a defense attorney, being in court, seeing how it goes down, seeing how people operate, you just can't overstate how valuable that experience is. And this is a great time to get it, particularly when you're a 3L, because your 3L year doesn't matter at all. So that's my position. Okay, let's see. Okay, we're going to answer one more question today, and then we're going to give some Halloween music suggestions. I think is what we'll do today. I'm going to ask this question in the hopes that Alice can answer it, because there are basically no words in the question that I understand, other than things like what and are. But all the other words, I don't know what they mean.
I have no idea what this is.
Alice is going to know, though, because she's much smarter than I am. Okay, this is from Celeste Michelle, and she says, what are your Enneagram numbers, or what are your tendencies based on Gretchen Rubin's 4 tendencies?
That doesn't surprise me that you don't know what any of these things are.
I don't know what any of this stuff is.
So I'm not going to answer that, only because, so Enneagram is like one of those personality, letters that mean different things. But Gretchen Rubin went to Yale, and so Pursuit of Happiness, or some happiness. I'm forgetting her famous book, the breakout New York Times bestseller, something about happiness and pursuing your heart. But she came and spoke to the law school, and she basically was like, the darkest time in my life was in this law school. And ever since I've left, I've been so happy. And we're like, is this supposed to be uplifting? So I'm not answering the question, but I just stuck out of my mind, because I was like, I think I was a 1L, and Gretchen Rubin was coming, and everyone was like, oh, the New York Times bestseller, and she's going to show us the key to happiness. And we walk in, and she's like, these are the darkest times I've ever experienced, and I never want to be back here. I was like, yikes. But with all that said, okay, the reason I can't give my Enneagram is because I think, unfortunately, I'm probably such a people pleaser, in that every one of these personality tests, whether it's Enneagram or it's, whatever other personality test, I kind of just meld to all of them. So it's completely unuseful, and there's probably an Enneagram for that as well. And then people who really love Enneagrams will be like, this is exactly who you are. It's kind of like astrology, where they're like, this is everything about who you are in your decision-making process. And I'm like, am I? Now I feel like I'm fulfilling a predestination. So I like to just surf it wild. Okay. Well, I still don't know any of that meant, but I'm going to go with, my characteristics are, I don't know. You know what's more fun for other people, though? For them to, now that this question has been asked, for everyone to post what they think our Enneagrams are, and then we'll take an Enneagram test, and then we'll reveal what it is, because then people will probably actually get it right, because they're pretty distinct characteristics. And I bet when people start posting, they'll be like, you're definitely a, Oh, that's great. Right. Yes. Everybody guess what my Enneagram Everyone guess, score and is. Then we will get we will take the test. What's your sign, Alice? My astrology sign? Yeah. I'm a Taurus. But what really matters? You get the horns. But what really matters is my Chinese astrology sign, because that is the one that matters for my people. What is that one? obviously, I'm a tiger.
Tiger. There you go.
Isn't that so fitting, though?
It's so fitting. It's so fitting. I am a Virgo and a rooster. So.
Rooster.
Mm-hmm.
My brother's a rooster.
Yeah.
I think that means we get along well, actually.
Does
like,
it?
You know, they have like whatever.
There you go. We just proved that Chinese astrology is accurate.
Works every time. Works every time. So.
Okay. So, Alice, do you have any song recommendations for people's Halloween parties that they can play?
I'm a huge Michael Jackson fan. Thriller, obviously. Obviously. It's so good.
Thriller is so good. Thriller's great. You know, I mean, you can't just play Monster Mash over and over again. Thriller is a good one.
Monster Mash is also great, but so when I was like
great
9 months
too.
pregnant, great. Oh, I mean, the video was a masterpiece when it came out and still is. But I went to like a Michael Jackson impersonator or cover. He wasn't a cover. He was like an impersonator of Michael Jackson concert when I was like 9.5 months pregnant with my oldest. And I was like, I really hope all this Michael Jackson Thriller is like seeping into his head and he loves this song. He does.
And he does? Yeah.
He does.
Yeah. My daughter loves it as well. I haven't shown her the video yet because I'm afraid it's going to scare her. But
does anything scare her though? But it is a great video. Like the dance, everything is so great. Maybe show her the 13 going on 30 dance version of Thriller.
There you go.
Then she'll love it.
Okay, so songs other than Thriller. Thriller's a great one. I got a whole bunch. I'll give you a few, and you can take it or leave it. So there's a song called, which I love this song. It's one of my favorite songs, called "Dixie Drugstore" by Grant Lee Buffalo. Fantastic song. If you've never heard it, it's about a guy who stops in New Orleans, Louisiana, and stumbles upon a voodoo store and has a very interesting meetup in the store. And I love this song, and I'd listened to it 1,000 times. And one night, I had a dream. And in that dream, there were additional lyrics to the song. There were more lines that I had never heard before. And I woke up in the morning, and I thought, I wonder if there are. And so I went out, and I tried to find it. And wouldn't you know it, there was a demo of the song before it was released publicly that had additional lyrics, but it was only available in like Denmark. So I bought the demo CD and actually put it on YouTube. So if you go on YouTube and you look up Dixie Drugstore Juju version, you'll actually find my other YouTube, my like personal YouTube thing, the only thing I've ever uploaded, which is this song with the extra lyrics.
You literally had a dream about it and it existed?
And it was true.
Did you know the lyrics in your dream?
No, I didn't know the lyrics. I can't go that far.
That would have been really creepy.
That would have been really creepy. But when I discovered that, it just blew my mind. Yes. Yes,
Are
Daphne.
the extra lyrics good?
They're amazing. It's like the song is totally different. It's not totally different, but it's different and like much longer, and just the lyrics are so great. I don't know. It's a great song. And it's about one of my favorite subjects in all of history. So like, it's like a historical song too. So if you haven't heard it, Dixie Drugstore, even if you can only find the original version, find it. Grant Lee Buffalo. I like it. That's my first one.
That's a fascinating story.
Very different song. All the Pretty Little Horses, the version by Current 93, is one of the creepiest songs you'll ever hear. Because it's just all the pretty little horses, but in this like, in just incredibly, like my wife won't let me listen to it when she's around. Because it's like very creepy. Perfect for your Halloween, night experience. Another creepy song that's more spoken word, What's He Building in There by Tom Waits. What's He Building in There is just a great, creepy, eerie thing. Listen to it. It will definitely freak you out. If you're looking for more of this sort of Wiccan thing to go along with your Samhain celebration, We All Come From the Goddess is one of my favorites. Having been to a dead supper in Salem where lots of songs were sung, I really enjoyed that one. So check that out if you're into that kind of thing. And if you're looking for more of an expansive experience, there is a rock opera by the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society called Dreams in the Witch House. And it is a rock opera version of the H.P. Lovecraft story, Dreams in the Witch House. Amazing. I have it on vinyl, play it all the time. Incredible. Just from the very first song till the end. If this podcast ever makes it big and we have a whole lot of money, I am putting that thing on Broadway. That's my goal. So if there's anybody out there who wants to fund an off-Broadway production of Dreams in the Witch House by the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society, I am there. Let's do it. It's great. You'll love it. Check it out.
I'm just laughing because I will never listen to any of these songs.
Oh, it's so good. There's this one song from it called Legends and Lore, which is just, it's so good. I mean, it's so good. It's just, it makes me happy to even just think about it. So those are my Halloween song recommendations for everybody out there who wanted a Halloween playlist. And then there's the obvious ones. I mean, we mentioned Thriller, but This Is Halloween from A Nightmare Before Christmas, which is really a Christmas movie, but This Is Halloween.
It really is.
Great song. Very Halloween. My kids watch the video over and over and over again. They love it. So that's a good one.
Well, this has been fun.
This has been fun. Alice, before we sign off, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, but we are like only halfway through my favorite month.
Their favorite month. And next week, I don't know, it's a pretty dark story, but a little less dark maybe than this one. I don't know. It involves somebody being murdered, so it's going to be dark, but it's definitely Halloween. Oh, our movie for this week. I didn't even think about that. Ooh, I think actually, okay. Yes, I remember what movie I wanted to watch for this. It's an obvious one. I'm not being creative here when I say this. Halloween. So this Friday, we're going to be watching Halloween, which also involves someone murdering family members. So Halloween, the original. Should we do the original or should I come back and do the...
You know what you're going to do. You're going to watch all of them.
Yeah, okay, that's a good point. Okay, so this Friday we'll watch the original, and then what I now consider to be the true sequel to Halloween, which is the one that came out like 4 years ago. Excellent. We'll watch that one as well. But what we're going to do, we're going to watch Halloween. If you've never seen it, which is possible, there's people out there who've never seen it, terrific movie. You're going to love it, I promise. And it's great. There's a reason it's a classic. Really good. So check it out on Twitter. We'll be there around 8:30 or so this Friday night. All right. Anything else, Alice, before we sign off?
No, I am beginning to think that 3 years ago, you roped me into starting a podcast with you so you could really just do a Halloween podcast.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Absolutely. Oh, if only October was every month. Okay, guys. Well, we'll be back next week with more Halloween horror. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors.
I don't remember this case happening, like, at the time.
I don't either, and it feels like
at all.
that. Yeah,
you would think would kind of have grabbed all the headlines, but I really don't remember anything about it.
You'd think. Okay, I got a word for you.
This
really
is
doesn't
not
have
broken
anything
up.
to do with this. But...
Do you wanna break it up?
Sure.
It's not a big deal, but
I always forget.
Yeah, it's fine.
Why don't we talk about something else while I'm doing that?
Yeah.
Entertain the guest. we are filing a motion that does X. The motion should do X.
And if it doesn't, that was the thing is like, I don't actually think the people who were being really verbose on the chat listened to a single word we said. I was like, I literally said, take as true everything written. That's not the point.
Dive into true crime on PlutoTV. Unravel the mysteries with forensic files and 48 hours. Investigate crimes with Dateline 24/7 and unsolved mysteries. With thousands of free crime movies and TV shows, PlutoTV is the true home of crime. Download the PlutoTV app on all your favorite devices and start streaming true crime on live channels and on demand. PlutoTV. Stream now, pay never.